Well, hello, and thank you for listening to the Chiropractic Research podcast series. My name is Dr. Dean Smith. I'm a clinical faculty member in the Department of Kinesiology and Health at Miami University, and I'm also a chiropractor in Eaton, Ohio. My research interests relate to understanding how chiropractic affects motor control and human performance. Thanks so much to all the listeners of the podcast out there. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, thanks for joining in. I really appreciate all of the great reviews on iTunes and the feedback from everyone. If you like listening to the podcast, please leave a great review on iTunes so we can attract even more chiropractors to listen to the best in chiropractic research. Last month, I mentioned I had created a PowerPoint slide presentation for patients. This is now available. The presentation provides snippets of educational information from the chiropractic and related literature from 200 peer-reviewed articles, 40 of which are from 2016. You can check out sample slides and get a more detailed description on the chiropracticscience.com website. As you know, my goals for producing these research interviews are to get the word out about chiropractic research from the experts that are actually doing the research. Secondly is to encourage collaboration of researchers, and third is to motivate and assist practitioners and students alike to pursue research careers in chiropractic science. I'd also like to point out that Chiropractic Science has partnered with chirocredit.com to make these podcasts possible. So let's get on with the interview today with Dr. Jim DeVocht. I'm really excited that in this interview we'll discuss topics such as Dr. DeVocht's research regarding the biomechanical aspects of chiropractic care on patients, chiropractic treatment of temporomandibular joint disorders, and a study to determine if chiropractic care of Special Operations Forces personnel could improve reaction and response times. Dr. James DeVocht is an associate professor in the Palmer Center for Chiropractic Research at Palmer College of Chiropractic. He has a BS in physics from Brigham Young University, a chiropractic degree from Palmer College of Chiropractic, an MS degree in mechanical engineering with an emphasis in biomedical engineering, and a PhD in biomedical engineering from the University of Iowa. He was in private practice in New Mexico, and he has spent 11 years on active duty as an officer in the U.S. Army, including 2 years as a research physicist. For the last 19 years, he has been a research scientist at Palmer and is going to retire this year. He has been a peer reviewer for several journals, including Clinical Biomechanics, Journal of Electromyography and Kinesiology, and Journal of Manipulative and Physiological Therapeutics, JMPT. He has also been an examiner of the PhD thesis of a research student at Macquarie University in Australia. His research interests include the use of electromyography, or EMG, to quantify the effect of chiropractic treatment, descriptive studies of chiropractic adjustments, and the chiropractic treatment of temporomandibular joint disorders. Dr. DeVocht, it's an honor to have you on the Chiropractic Science podcast.
Well, it's quite an honor to be here.
Well, thank you. So let's go ahead and get started because we've got a lot of different things to talk about today, and you've done a lot of really interesting research, so I want to get through as much as we possibly can. But first, I want to just dive into your story a little bit about how you became interested in becoming a chiropractor in the first place.
Well, it is kind of an interesting story, I guess you'd say. My dad's a chiropractor, was a chiropractor. He always wanted me to be a chiropractor, but I never had any interest in life sciences at all. I was always more into physical sciences. I was a huge fan of the space race. I graduated from high school in 65, so that was kind of during the peak of that space race to get to the moon. I found that very exciting, and I just sort of assumed that I would probably end up being in aerospace somewhere. But then when I got in school, I majored in physics at BYU, Brigham Young, and while I was there, the Vietnam War was going on. I guess I should say the Vietnam conflict. And there were people getting drafted out of school there. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to end up going to Vietnam, I would rather go as an officer than an enlisted guy. So I joined ROTC while I was there, and I graduated in '72. But at that time, there were very few people going to Vietnam. The conflict wasn't officially over yet, but it was really winding down. And actually, there was more people wanting to go than there were slots over there, people who were going to be career military, and I very happily gave my slot to one of them. But then I was in the Army, and I was, my first tour was as a research physicist in Philadelphia at Frankfurt Arsenal, kind of a cushy tour for the Army. And we had never really planned to stay in the Army. I was going to just get out after that tour, but they offered me a tour to Greece. Well, my wife and I had never been out of the country before, and that sounded pretty exotic. And we knew somebody over there, actually, and had been riding with them, and they liked it over there. And so, and our kids were little then. We only had two, and they were very small. So we thought, well, this would be a great time. So we went over to Greece, and we were there for 3 years. And this is kind of the funny part, I guess. I don't really remember exactly how this happened, but somehow while I was over in Greece, I got the idea of going to chiropractic school. My dad had pretty well given up on me by this time. When I graduated from UU with a degree in physics and a commission in the Army, he pretty well gave up on trying to ever get me to be a chiropractor. But I still wonder about that. But somehow I got to thinking about it over there and decided that I would like to do that. And so I ended up, to make a long story short, I did get out of the Army and did go to chiropractic school at Palmer there. So that was kind of a weird situation. I guess the story doesn't quite end there. So I graduated from Palmer, and then I went down to New Mexico, a little town where my parents lived in, Berlin, New Mexico, about 7,000 people. And I went into practice, but I didn't like being in practice. I didn't like the actually hands-on part of chiropractic. I liked chiropractic and everything, but I just didn't seem to have that sense of touch that you need to have to be an effective chiropractor. And so, and to make another really long story short, I ended up participating in this program that Palmer had. They were just looking to get into research in a bigger way here at Palmer, and they were funding people to go to graduate school, people who had a DC already, to go to graduate school with the idea they would come back to Palmer and do research. And so I thought, well, this is great, because then I can stay within chiropractic, because I love chiropractic. I just didn't like practicing as a chiropractor. And so, again, making a really long story short, that's what I did. And I ended up getting my PhD finally at the University of Iowa. And I've been involved here at Palmer pretty much ever since. I did stay at the University of Iowa for a few years in a little group called the Iowa Spine Research Center, even though I was employed by Palmer. And then I came here about 14 years ago, I think it was. So,
okay, yeah, that's really story. Yeah, that's really interesting, actually. Can you tell me just a little bit more about your PhD program? What kinds of things did you study, and were you thinking about how you could apply this stuff to chiropractic at that time, or I'm just kind of curious what was going through your thoughts?
Oh yeah, I was trying to apply things to chiropractic. My advisor was Vijay Goyal, who was the chair of the department at the time, the biomedical engineering department, and also a big guy in spine research, and it seemed like a kind of a good fit. However, his research was almost totally dealing with spinal implants and the biomechanical effects of them on the spine. He did a lot of computer modeling, funded by implant companies who were wanting to test their devices when the computer simulations before actually trying them on people. And I wasn't interested in that sort of thing at all. So, and this is kind of weird. I had a really hard time coming up with a topic to do research that was be chiropractic related. and I talked to quite a few people like Scott Haldeman and like Jay Triano, and just never could really come up with anything that was really doable. It was kind of funny. One day my advisor comes into a meeting and says, "Hey, we got the perfect idea for you." I had done computer modeling for my master's thesis on intervertebral disc, and I like computer modeling. He said, "You could do a computer model of the subluxation." And I'm thinking, I don't think so.
Yeah, and you can do that in 1 year, right?
Yeah.
That'll be a short project, right?
Yeah, I sort of thought, well, that's a nice thought, but thanks, but no thanks. So I was wandering around for quite a little while trying to come up with a topic, and the vice chair of the Department of Hospital Dentistry came over to the biomedical engineering department. As I said, my advisor was the chair, and she was wanting to get a graduate student to make a computer simulation of the jaw, the TMJ, temporomandibular joint, because their treatments for TMJ disorders weren't working very well, and they thought, well, they could get a better understanding of the biomechanics of it. Maybe they could devise a better treatment. And so she wanted somebody to do this project, computer modeling, finite element modeling, as they call it, of the TMJ. And so my advisor tells me about that. And I said, well, that's not exactly chiropractic. And he said, well, chiropractors treat TMJ problems, don't they? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, there are some that do. That's not certainly mainstream chiropractic at all. I was kind of hem-hawing around, but we never could come up with a better project, so I ended up doing that. And I ended up having a second advisor, the vice chair who had come over there, vice chair of the Department of Hospital Dentistry. And so between those two advisors, that's what I did my PhD thesis on, was a computer simulation of the jaw, trying to look at the biomechanics of it. So, and that's kind of how I got interested in TMJ issues too.
Yeah, that's great. And we'll be talking about that a little bit later today as well. So I know that you have authored numerous publications in a variety of excellent peer-reviewed journals. And what I'd like to do is pick some of these papers and some of the projects that you've worked on over the years, and just have a conversation about each one. So I'd like to get started on at least one of your current projects. I don't know all of your current projects, but I know one because I'm working on it with you, and that is the study dealing with the Department of Defense and chiropractic care in regard to reaction time and response times. So if we could talk about this study just for a little bit, the results are not in yet, to my knowledge, but we could certainly talk about the methods and the protocol for the paper. So can you give us an idea of how the study was conceived? How did it come about?
Well, the Department of Defense put out a request for proposals for these particular projects. There were 3 different projects that were all kind of lumped into one request. And so that this was not our idea at all, but they made the rather interesting request to see whether chiropractic treatment could improve the reaction time of special operations forces personnel. And we thought that was a really interesting request because, I mean, these are like the Navy SEALs, the ones that went in to get bin Laden. I mean, these are the cream of the crop. These are highly active, physical, fit people. And, of course, the reaction time is very important to them. And a lot of it could literally be the difference between life and death in some cases. So it's an interesting question. But we didn't ask the question. We just came up with a way of trying to answer the question. So that's how it came about.
Got it. So can you give us an idea of what what this particular study involves? What are the different components, and what kinds of things are we measuring in this study?
Well, we came up with 5 different measurements after considering several others. Looking back on it now, it would have been pretty impractical, but we settled on 5. 2 or 3 of them are pretty much pure reaction time. Reaction time meaning the time to begin a response to a prompt. So we had 2 versions of a simple reaction time, meaning a prompt appears on a computer screen and the participant is just holding the button in their hand, and they just press the button when they see the prompt on the screen. And there can be a delay. There's a delay between prompts, and that delay varies from half a second to 4 seconds. So they can't really anticipate when the next prompt's going to be exactly. And so there's very little motion. They see the prompt and they just press their thumb. So that's pretty close to pure reaction time. And then we did another one just like that, except that we had their foot resting on a pedal on the floor, and they would press the pedal with their foot. So those are 2 reaction times. And then, to make it a little more interesting, a little more challenging, we had the participant sitting there holding the button in each hand and having each foot over a pedal on the floor. And then a prompt would come on the screen, and it would not only tell them to push a button, but it would tell them which one to push. And it would be, and they didn't have to read the prompt. It would, by the appearance on the screen, if it was in the upper left corner, it was for the left hand, and so forth, lower left corner, the left foot, so forth. So they could see by the position of it, and but they had to make a choice as to which button or pedal to push. And that was kind of a fun one to watch people do that, because they'd be going along and they'd push the button, and as soon as they pushed it, they'd realize it was the wrong one, and they'd go, "Ooh, that was." It's like they almost like they got stabbed or something.
Oops.
Yeah. They'd flinch, So those were reaction times, and then there's 2 other ones that were response times, meaning there was a little more physical motion involved, so it wasn't just a trivial amount of motion, but a little more motion than that. And so one of them was one that you had worked with, the one that you had introduced me to, was Fitts' Law type of experiments, where there's 2 circles on the screen. When they began, the 2 circles appear on the screen, the cursor is in one, and there's an X on the other one, and the person using the mouse moves the cursor from where it is to the other one, the one that has the X in it. And as soon as they click in that other one inside it, then the X goes out there and pops up in the other one where they started. And then they go back, move the cursor back with the mouse and click inside that one. And then that pair is over, and timing stops at that point, by the way. And so then timing just stops at that point. But then when they're ready for another pair of circles to appear, they click on the mouse anywhere on the screen, and then the 2 circles appear again, and they could be different sizes and different orientations. The centers are always the same distance apart, but they could be different size and orientation. And so then they would go through that pair of circles, and then the time would stop again at that point.
Great.
So that was a response time one. The other response time was what is called the T-wall. It's a commercially available device. We were doing this down at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. This is the nearest place where they have Special Forces personnel. And while we were down there, they had one of these devices in their physical therapy department. And so they said, "Why don't you use something like this?" And well, it looks pretty good, actually. And what that is that there's this panel of buttons that are like 8 centimeters square, pretty good sized little buttons. And you stand in front of this panel, there's 32 of them in a 4x8 array, and a light comes on one of them. An inside light inside the button comes up, and the timing starts as soon as the participant hits that first button. And of course, as soon as they hit the first button, that light goes out, and then another one comes out on, so they got to see where that one is and then hit it. And it's not just a little touch. You can't just touch it. You have to kind of smack it pretty good. And then it goes through a sequence of 100 of those. And it usually takes about 1 minute or a little less to go through 100. So those are 5 different tests. 3 were pretty much pure reaction time, and 2 that were more of a response time.
Okay. So how many people were in the study, and what kind of design study was it?
Well, we had 120 people randomized into 2 groups, one that received chiropractic treatment. They came in for 4 visits, and so we measured them before they had their first treatment, and then we measured them again before they had their last treatment. So they really only had 3 treatments as far as the test concerned, as far as the improvement to be able to see would go. But there was over a 2-week period. They came in twice a week for 2 weeks for those 4 treatments. So and then there was another what we call a wait list control group, where they came in on like the first visit, the same way as the first visit, and they got tested there. But then they didn't get any treatment. They just sat around for 5 or 10 minutes, 10 minutes I guess it was, to simulate the time of the actual treatment, and then they were tested again right after that as well. But we were really using the time just before the treatment. And then they didn't come in for those other 2 visits, but they came in at the same time, like 10 days later, for a second version of the testing to see if they improved over that time. So it was a wait list control group there. And then they call it wait list because in order to give them an incentive to be in the study, they said once they finished the study, then they received 4 treatments of chiropractic treatments, just like the other ones did. But that wasn't really part of the study. That was just, to give them an incentive to be in the study. It took about 21 months. We have finished the data collection. It took about 21 months to get 120 people. I think there was 157 total that were screened. I think 177, I guess. I remember, anyway, something like that. I think we screened out 57 that were not eligible. But anyway, the data collection is completed. In fact, we wrote a protocol paper to be published in Trials, and just yesterday, I got word that it has been accepted for publication. By the way.
Great.
So, yeah. So now I'm starting to work on the results paper. So when we get those, that'll all go in there. And that'll be a second paper about this study.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just curious, what was this project like compared to other projects you've worked on? It sounds pretty involved, and I know what it was like trying to come up with the methods, but I know that you traveled back and forth to the base quite a few times, and I only made it there once. So what was it like? I'm just curious.
That was. This is the first time, actually, we did this kind of a study where the actual data collection was not done here. You and I came up with all of the tests and so forth, and here I did a preliminary pilot study to kind of test everything out, in which we made some pretty major revisions to the way we were doing things. But when the actual data was done, of course, we had to go somewhere where there were special forces people, and there aren't any here, so we couldn't do it here.
What, you mean so Palmer isn't?
Yeah.
Palmer doesn't have a bunch of special ops?
Afraid not. Nope. There might be 1 or 2. I don't know if there's any, but 1 or 2 at most, I'm sure. So yeah, that was challenging to get down there and get everything all set up, all the equipment to do all the stuff with, and then to train somebody down there to do it, and and then to kind of monitor from the distance how things were going. There were some challenges with that. It was a very different kind of thing for us to do that from a distance like that. But it did finally work out. There were some challenges associated with that, but it worked out pretty smoothly.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Probably not that I had to deal with this, but one complex thing about this was that there were 3 IRB boards associated with this project. And so everything that we did had to be approved by all 3. And so you would send things to one, and they would look at it and they'd say, well, I don't like this or that, so you change this or that. And then you'd send it to the second one, and the second one say, okay, what's okay, except I don't like this or that, something else. And then so you change those, but then you had to send it back to the first one to make sure they were okay with those changes.
Yeah, that's tough.
And then once they were both okay with those changes, then you had to send them to the third one, who likely had some issues about certain things, and then you had to send that back to the other two. I mean, it was a huge, huge hassle to deal with this, and it's not like they have IR board meetings every day or anything either, so
right.
It took a long time
right
to get through that.
Yeah, and
I didn't have to deal with that personally.
And generally, people are volunteering their time, so you're right. It's not like it's not going to get done right away. So
yeah. And then sometimes they'd see something and they didn't like it. We'd have to review it, then change it, and then they have to review it again. It just drug on forever. I mean, I can't remember how long it was. And like I say, we have other administrative people here who handle that sort of thing. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
But they were like pulling their hair out. And I was just thinking, and I'm just there, well, we're ready yet? We're ready yet? Well, no. But, like, we had the equipment set up down there. I can't remember now, for some long time. It was like several months, close to a year maybe even, before we actually got all the approvals from everybody, before we could actually begin, even though we were already with everything ready to go.
Right.
So that was a very different aspect of this particular study.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. Well, I wanted to get through the next couple of papers deal with electromyography. And the first one that I'd like to talk about was from JMPT, and this was from 2005. And the goal of the study was to examine the effect of spinal manipulation on EMG activity in areas of localized tight muscle bundles of the low back. Can you tell us about that study?
Yeah, this is when I was still up at the University of Iowa, in the Iowa Spine Research Center group there. And I just went down to a couple of local chiropractors and asked if I could set up in their shop a little bit there. And what they did, I'd have them, when a patient came in with low back pain that was fairly significant, they would volunteer to be in the study, and they'd say, okay. We never had anybody decline, I don't think. So I would have the chiropractor go along and palpate along the low back and figure out what he thought were the tightest two muscle bundles in there. And then I would put EMG electrodes over there. Those are the things that sense the electrical activity going to the muscles. So if you have a tight muscle bundle, you would expect the EMG level to be a little higher because those tight because the muscles are overactive. And then we were thinking, well, if the adjustment releases the tight muscle bundle, then you ought to be able to see a reduction in the EMG level immediately following the adjustment. And so I did that. I think I had 5 or 6, I can't remember how many patients in each doctor's office. And they were very accommodating, the two doctors and the patients. I took these wires up. This is before we had wireless stuff too. There was wires everywhere, and I could see the one chiropractor used the activator methods. The other chiropractor was more diversified, and also I'd hooked up a accelerometer to the tip of the activator when they were doing that, so that. The accelerometer is a transducer that just senses acceleration. So when the activator instrument was activated, the accelerometer would send a signal out, and I took that signal and fed it into the EMG system so that it was recorded just like another channel of EMG, and therefore the timing was the same. So I could see on my plots of data, I could see the EMG activity, and I could also see the exact timing of the click of the activator along with EMG activity. And there were times that I was able to see a very distinct drop. In fact, I have on my wall right now, my favorite plot, which shows very elevated EMG activity, shows a few clicks of the activator, and then, interestingly enough, it's about maybe 2 or 3 seconds later that the EMG activity dropped just like a step down, just like drastically. Didn't just gradually drop down, just immediately dropped down. But that was like 2 or 3 seconds after the click, and then it was still at a moderately higher level. And then there were a few more clicks given. The first ones were along the sacrum, and then the other ones were along the lumbars there. And then there was another drastic step down to a more local level. And again, that drop occurred a few seconds after the clicks were given. And then I shut the instrument off, or the EMG system off, until the doc finished the treatment. So then, like 5 or 10 minutes later, just before they were going to come up, I turned it on again and took a little more data just so you could see how that compared. And it was always the same before and after the break. It never changed during those minutes. But you could, and you could see a very distinct drop sometimes. Like I make the point. It was my favorite plot that I have on the wall. Most of the it's very distinct. It's very classic, and it's just like we were expecting to see. But we didn't see that most of the time.
Okay.
But we did see it some of the time.
So did you find differences between the activator and the diversified at all?
No, I think they were pretty much the same. I don't quite remember, but tell you the truth. But it was a little harder to get the exact time on the diversified, because I was sort of holding the accelerometer in my hand, and I was just going to flip it when he made his adjustment, because it wasn't quite as easy. But it showed up, as I recall, pretty much the same.
Okay.
They both got that reduction occasionally, not usually, gotta say. In fact, I was quite surprised that most of the time the EMG activity wasn't really that much elevated, if any, beforehand, and so you're not going to see a drop if it's not elevated.
Right.
Because I don't know. I didn't have any way of really quantifying how tight the muscle bundles were. I just said, well, find the tightest muscle bundle you can.
Got it.
So how tight is tight? So I don't know.
Sure. So the next.
But that was pretty interesting. That was pretty interesting, though.
Yeah. That I think that's phenomenal. Looking into that and adding the acceleration piece to it and getting the timing is pretty amazing to see that. I'm actually. I was just thinking about the 2 second. I mean, why 2 seconds? Maybe it just takes that long for cross bridges to start to relax or something like that. I'm in the muscle. I'm not sure, but do you have any thoughts as to why 2 seconds or? Well, I don't really know, of course, but my thought was that it's probably the CNS is kind of cogitating over that information, because it wasn't like I say, it wasn't a gradual decline. It was just very abrupt. I mean, you look at the plot, and it's just very abrupt. So it doesn't seem to me like it's kind of the gradual relaxation of something that you're watching here. Got it. It seems to me like it's something from the CNS directing it differently after it cogitated. That's my thought. I mean, I have no idea really, but that's right. No, I like your thought. It makes a lot of sense, and it's a really interesting study for sure. Now, and then the next study that I wanted to talk about is also an EMG study, and this just came out. I think this past month, if I'm not mistaken. This was the title of it was Novel Electromyographic Protocols for or using axial rotation and cervical flexion relaxation for the assessment of subjects with neck pain. And this was in Journal of Chiropractic Medicine, and like I said, just came out. So This one you're going to have to help me out with, because I was trying to read through the paper and I'm not sure I got all of the information right in my head. So can you tell us about what this study was designed to try to look at and what you found?
Well, the notion here, and I kind of like EMG in general because I figure it's kind of a window into the current functioning of the musculature, so without being invasive. So I kind of like at least the general notion of EMG. And the thought of this is a fairly common thing. Well, it started in the lumbars, is what they call the lumbar flexion-relaxation phenomenon. The notion is that if you're standing straight up and then lean forward, your paraspinal muscles in your back are going to be quite active as they're holding you up and lifting you up or letting you go down, sort of. But it's the paraspinal muscles in the back primarily that are holding you, and so they're active as you're rising and lower. But when you get to the end of the range of motion, when you're full forward, flex fully forward, then the range of motion is limited by ligaments. And so ligaments are like little ropes. They don't use any energy. So when you get to the end of the range of motion, the weight of your upper body can be held by the ligaments without any muscle activity. And your very efficient CNS realizes this, and so the muscle activity decreases when you're fully flexed and then increases again as you come back up. And in fact, it's more active when you're coming back up because, they're actually pulling you up instead of allowing you to come down in a controlled way. So that's called the flexion-relaxation phenomenon. Now, of course, if a person has back problems, you typically have hyperactive musculature there and spasms and so forth. And so you're going to see activity even when you're fully flexed. So and you can quantify this by comparing the degree of activity when it's on the way up, the maximum amount, to the minimum amount of when it's fully flexed. So it should be quite different. But if you have back problems, then they're not so different because it doesn't fully relax when you're down there. So it's a kind of an objective way to get an indication of the integrity of your musculoskeletal system there in that region. The lumbar thing's been around for a long time. Just in recent years, they started doing this in the cervicals as well. And so you start with your head up and flex forward, just like you do with the lumbar, but only just using your cervicals. But there's a company, Myovision, who markets a EMG system, and they have a little different way of doing it, where to monitor how well that musculature is functioning, instead of doing the flexion forward kind of thing, they rotate your head to the left and right. So one side, the muscle on one side of your neck will be more active when you're pulling to one side, and then the mirror image would be when you're pulling the other side. So by measuring the activity of those muscles, you get a similar kind of thing, but I like it better, actually, because it seems like you get more distinct readings and it's easier for the patient to perform. So I was kind of fascinated, but there weren't any peer-reviewed articles about this axial rotation phenomenon at all. Myovision had published something in their own stuff, but it wasn't peer-reviewed. And so this study kind of looked at that, and we did some variations of the way these tests were done. And I just thought it was kind of a novel thing, so I liked that idea. And that was kind of the point of that. I kind of recommended the axial rotation part of it as the most preferred method of monitoring the muscular activity there in the cervicals.
Okay. So now, did you have any people with neck pain in the study at all, or were these people all without symptoms? Or
Yeah, we did. We had neck pain people. We went to a pain center and got some volunteers, and it came out, quite encouraging that it does seem to help, and it works better. And they, as expected, they, it worked out pretty good. Better than, the differences in the musculature is not as apparent in the neck pain people as it is in the people who are normal.
Okay.
Because your muscles quiet down, when they're not being needed. Similar to the flexion-relaxation phenomenon.
Got it. So they just had, the people with neck pain just tended to have a higher baseline level, and it didn't seem to calm down quite as much as the controls.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. As the person moved from left to right, depending on which muscle you're monitoring, you see a large peak when they went one way as it was activated, and then when they went the other way, it didn't peak. And then when you did the mirror image of that muscle on the other side, it was the reverse. So you get this nice peak in one direction, but not in the other direction, or a much smaller peak. And those peaks are very pronounced and much easier to measure and so forth, much more consistent, it seemed to me, anyway, than the flexion relaxation part. So I liked it better.
Yeah, that's great. Well, hopefully they continue on. Someone continues on with that kind of line. It seems good, and then it would be interesting to see how adjustments affect that. Also.
Yep, it would. Good line of research there for somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. So
not me, since I'm retiring next month.
Not you. Well, we're going to have to find somebody to do that for sure. So the next studies that I wanted to go through, and you've done several studies dealing with TMJ, including your dissertation. Can you tell us a bit about some of these studies? I'm particularly interested in any that might have involved chiropractic care as well.
Well, the way I specifically got involved in this as a chiropractor, I did my PhD, with that, but that was there was no chiropractic involved in that at all, and by the way, we didn't really find anything to help anything. We didn't seem to be able to understand the biomechanics any better. They weren't able to improve their treatments any because of all my 3 or 4 years of work on that. But anyway, at one time, I was still at the University of Iowa. Like I say, I was there with the spine research group. And the University of Iowa initiated a CAM clinic, complementary alternative medicine clinic, in the hospital. So once a week they would meet, and they would have a group of CAM providers of various sorts. There's an acupuncturist, and I think healing touch. There was about probably 6 or 8 different people there. There's a religious guy there. I can't remember what all there was, but one of them was a chiropractor, and this chiropractor happened to be somebody that I knew. In fact, it was the same guy that I had done this other study with. I was just telling you about the reduction of EMG activity. Okay. And so I knew him, and he was going to these meetings, and he asked me if I wanted to go along with him. And I thought, well, yeah, that'd be kind of interesting, So, so I would go to these weekly meetings with him. And one time in one of these meetings, there was somebody that was there. Now, this is just after I graduated, with my PhD. So I'm still there at the University of Iowa, but I'm working with this other little group. So there was one of these cases that had one of the problems this person had was a pretty strong TMJ issue. Pretty bad case of TMD, temporomandibular disorder. And on the way out, this chiropractor mentions to me, I do pretty good work with TMJ problems, and this is Wally Schaefer, by the way. They're in Coralville, right next to Iowa City, and I said, "Oh yeah, how good are you?" He said, "Well, pretty good, I guess. I mean, they come in, I treat them, and they get better." I said, "Well, would you be interested in comparing your approach to a dental approach?" Because I'd gotten to know this department vice chair very well in these last few years, and I knew that she was interested in TMD treatment. And so I thought, well, she would probably be interested in doing something like this if you think you have some better way of treating it. And he said, well, yeah, I guess. So I set up a meeting for the three of us. And that first meeting, the first two meetings, kind of interesting. Even though I'd worked with her closely for a few years, and she knew I was a chiropractor, I mean, chiropractic had not come into this at all. You know, there's never been any discussion about chiropractic. And she didn't really know much of anything about chiropractic. And so before she could get involved with something like this, she wanted to have some sense of what she was getting involved with. And I don't remember what we said, actually. I think it must have been quite a few years ago now. But it must have been pretty good, because after those first two visits, there was never any, that question never came up again. She was okay.
Wow, that's cool.
So whatever it was that we said, it eased her mind to the point that she was willing to work with us with no further reservations. So anyway, probably the most dramatic thing that I've done is the most practical thing that I've done as chiropractor is what we one of the first things we did was we set up a prospective case series, meaning that we just took people as they came in, new patients who came into his office. We would check them for their degree. If they had TMD, we'd make some measurements to quantify how bad the TMD, how far they could open their mouth without pain. There were some pain scales that we used and so forth. So we would measure them, and then he would treat them, and then we'd measure them again and see how they improved. And we had like 9 that came through, I think it was, and they all got better. And so we published a paper about that. Well, we presented this at a ACRAC meeting, and Arlen Four, the head of Activator, was there, and this guy Wally Schaefer used Activator, but Activator had some years before did have some kind of a protocol for TMD, but when they published their first textbook, they did not include it because it didn't seem to work very well, and there were people getting hurt with it. And so they did not include it in their first textbook. But this guy, Wally Schaefer, took the rudimentary part of that process, that protocol, and developed into something that did work and didn't cause injury. And so Arlen Four thought that was hot stuff. And actually kind of put that into the Activator protocol. And then when the second textbook came out, they had Wally and me jointly write a chapter about TMD, treatment of TMD. I wrote the part about TMD itself, describing it, the mechanism and so forth, and then Wally wrote the part about how you actually treat it. So that was pretty exciting. That was a very rewarding thing for me. I mean, I didn't discover anything. I didn't invent anything. But I happened to run across somebody who did, and he would have just been still doing this by himself there in his office there in Coralville, Ottawa. But now, because this study that we did now it's published, it's in the Activator textbook, and Activator clinicians use that now. So that was very rewarding for me.
Yeah, that's great. So what was the technique like? It used an activator. Are there specific spots that the doctor would use to adjust the jaw? Or I'm just trying to imagine what that would look like.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah. I mean, if you're familiar with activator procedure at all, they have various movements that you do that elicit a leg length difference, and they use the near field leg check approach a
Okay.
lot. And he's come up with several tests to check for different types of thrust, or whether they're needed or not. It's very much like the regular activator protocol, but just applied to that particular region.
Okay, got it.
He uses a very gentle touch. In fact, he uses the lowest setting on the activator and then puts his thumb over the segment anyway, so the adjustment is given through his thumb to the joint itself. Very gentle, and it seems to work very nicely.
Well, that's great.
I should say one time, kind of a funny little thing. Wally was telling me that he was traveling somewhere, and in the midst of his travels in some place, he just was passing through. He needed an adjustment, so he stopped in at this guy he could see that was an activator practitioner. And so the guy's working him over, and this guy doesn't know who Wally Schaefer is or anything. He's working him over, and he starts doing some of the checks for the jaw on Wally. And so Wally kind of asks him about it, and he says, "Oh yeah, this is new stuff that just came out. It's great stuff. I love it. It's been I've helped many people with it."
Gotta love that when that happens.
He was adjusting the guy that came up with it.
That's spectacular. I love that. So Jim, one of the goals of the podcast is to motivate and assist practitioners and students to pursue research careers in chiropractic science. With the many years that you've had in chiropractic science and chiropractic research, what kind of advice might you give folks who are looking to get into a research career in chiropractic?
Well, there are several ways of doing that, I guess. I mean, I guess, of course, the best thing is to get your DC degree first, so you have a basis to work from, although it's not absolutely necessary. We have people here in the research center who don't have a DC degree, but I don't know. I guess there isn't any magic way to do this. The Palmer does offer a master's degree in I forget what the exact name of it is. It's clinical research or something like that. Or if you're really interested, really want to get into it, you can do something like that. I had a person here as a work study person who just helped me with my publications and so forth. And as she was going to Palmer, and she'd never done any research or anything, but as she was seeing me involved in my research, she became interested in the possibility and did what we call a research honors program here. So they do a project with a mentor while they're a student, and then graduate with research honors. And so she ended up doing that, and she discovered that she really liked doing that sort of thing. In fact, so now she's down at Missouri getting her PhD in neuroscience.
Wow, good stuff.
So if you really want to get into, you can get, into that realm of things. Another project I'm working on right now is what we call practice-based research, where, and this is a TMD issue again here, trying to see how this works in the field in general, where we're soliciting people who use a particular technique that we're interested in, like activator in this case, as well as a few others we thought we'd explore too, like SOT and NUCA and Blair. And we approach chiropractor in the field and say, okay, well, would you like to be involved in this project? What it amounts to is it's kind of like, it's just like that case series I did with Wally, where they just, as patients come through the door with a particular disorder that we're looking for, then they take some measurements on them at the first visit, and then once or twice later on, and see how they improved. And so it's just, they just go through the regular treatment. They don't do anything different. The only thing different is that they're filling out these forms, at the beginning and kind of along the way. And so this gives chiropractors in the field the opportunity to be involved in an actual research project, which I think would be kind of interesting to a lot of people. And of course, if you want to, you could always it'd be a good idea to be reading literature. JMPT and others have good information in them to kind of keep up with what's going on. So there's no magic thing here, but those are kind of general things that come to mind.
Yeah, great. Do you have any concluding remarks you'd like to share with everyone? Probably people listening would be a mixture. I guess some researchers probably listening, lots of practitioners, maybe even some patients.
Oh, I don't know. Okay. That's an interesting question. To me, it's been very frustrating in a lot of ways. Like I said, my undergraduate degree was in physics, where the laws are very precise. I mean, the law of gravity, you can predict things right to the nth decimal point. But when you get into the life sciences, there's nothing precise. Everything is fuzzy.
Yeah.
And it can be very frustrating at times. So you have to be aware of that when you get into this, that things don't work out cut and dried very often, if ever. And you just have to kind of expect that as you're going along. And so I guess it takes large numbers of people to get any kind of data usually. There's so many variables. I mean, you say you get a person with a certain disorder, and you want to get everybody with that same disorder. Well, everybody's an individual person, and they may have that disorder, but they've got a lot of other little variances too, and so you can never have a study with everybody exactly the same, except for the one thing you're studying. They've got a lot of other issues too, so that makes it difficult, makes it challenging. But it's just part of the game. You just have to deal with it and do the best you can, and we keep plugging on.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate you being on the podcast. I learned a few tidbits about you that I didn't know before. Like, I didn't know your dad was a chiropractor.
Yeah. Yeah, he graduated in 1930.
Wow. From Palmer?
From Palmer, yep.
All right. Good stuff.
1930.
Wow. Amazing.
I'd say he's a little older. He was 50 years old when I was born.
Oh, okay.
He was back quite a ways.
Okay.
I remember seeing B.J. Palmer here one time when I was a kid. When he came back for homecoming, or they called Lyceum then. I was like only in the 4th, 5th grade, but I do remember seeing B.J. Palmer one time.
Wow. That's cool. That's really cool. Well, Jim, I really appreciate you spending some time before you retire to talk with me and to come on the podcast. This was terrific. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Like I say, everybody's always entitled to my opinion.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Thanks again. Take care.
You bet. Bye-bye.